From revolutionizing the concept of serialized storytelling on TV to introducing complex characters that have just never been seen outside of the big screen before, it's easy to see why The Sopranos is considered the greatest TV show of all time. And it had one thing in particular going for it. The Sopranos was the first show ever to push so many boundaries. You've got to understand, TV was not considered a serious medium for a really long time. Rather, anything that got greenlit by a TV channel had to have mass appeal, and it had to cater to lots of viewers on a tight budget. HBO was instrumental in changing the trend. They were willing to push the envelope and take a chance with some truly challenging storytelling. But if you think about it, The Sopranos doesn't seem all that special on paper. So, what is it exactly that set the show apart so much? Well, it had a lot to do with showrunner David Chase's unique approach. The show focused on developing complex psychological portraits of its characters. Just take Tony Soprano for example. The guy personified the modern TV anti-hero, mostly because he's just not all that likable of a person. He's selfish, arrogant, and above all else, ruthless. That's not the sort of guy that you would typically root for on TV. So it's pretty amazing that David Chase was able to pull something like this off. And it's not just Tony Soprano either. Every single character on the show had something complex to offer. Like my personal favorite, Christopher Moltisanti. Sure, he was impulsive and violent, but he also manages to be extremely sympathetic. We see the kinds of aspirations he has, the way he wants to make movies someday, and he shows some serious talent too, like in that scene where he goes to an improv group. At first, we all assume that he's gonna be terrible at it, only for him to dig deep into the trauma of his life and use it to act out a stunning scene on the spot. That's just one example of the many iconic scenes that the show has to offer. What's more, the show managed to depict its characters accurately, but it did not short sell the Italian-American experience. At its core, The Sopranos was a show about the American dream, and it also kinda criticized the very notion of this dream in a bunch of ways. Tony Soprano's the kind of guy who always gets what he wants, but is he really any different from the ruthless corporate overlords that try to bleed us dry? If anything, Tony's at least a bit more straightforward in everything he does, but the show still doesn't glorify him. None of the horrible things he does are sugarcoated, but they also don't cover up the fact that he genuinely loves his children, even though his love for them seems to be conditional. There's no easy way to interpret any of these characters. In depicting Tony's struggles to preserve his way of life and showing him trying to make a way in the world, the show creates a beautifully poetic representation of the hollow pursuit of wealth and what it means for the American people. It was only a matter of time before other shows tried to replicate the formula, and quite a few of them actually did a pretty good job. Breaking Bad and Mad Men are just a couple examples that come to mind. It's safe to say that we would have never gotten Walter White without Tony Soprano, nor would we have seen Don Draper charming our screens. These two characters are anti-heroes that will go down in history because they were central to the golden age of television. But despite all that, neither Breaking Bad nor Mad Men could get nearly as successful as The Sopranos. Don't get me wrong, they're both great shows, but they're not exactly Sopranos level good, you know? I might be stirring up some controversy here, but The Sopranos became a global phenomenon, whereas Breaking Bad and Mad Men always had to get compared to it, which meant that they weren't seen with as much awe as their predecessor. HBO itself also had a lot of trouble replicating The Sopranos formula. From The Wire to Boardwalk Empire, HBO tried its hand countless times, only to fall short each and every time. Now, I will say this, The Wire is one of the greatest shows of all time, but it's still second to The Sopranos. Boardwalk Empire is a bit more underrated, although it's still top-notch television in my humble opinion. But again, comparisons between Nucky Thompson and Tony Soprano loom large, so the show never got to set itself apart. Clearly, there was something special about The Sopranos, and it might not be what you're thinking. Despite what you might assume, The Sopranos was a funny show. It's kinda weird to say that, like this is a show about mobsters and criminals.
Are you in the mafia?
Am I in the what?
whatever you want to call it, organized crime.
I'm in the waste management business. Everybody immediately assumes you're mobbed up.
And it can be downright gritty when it depicts their horrific acts on screen. But even so, there's no shortage of humor and levity across its 86 episodes. Arguably, the best episode of the entire series is Pine Barrens. It's the one where Paulie and Chris get trapped in the woods while chasing after someone that owes them money. And it turns out that he used to be Russian Special Forces, responsible for killing countless Chechnyans.
You pay the price. Capiche? Fine.
So they go from being the hunters to the hunted. That's a pretty scary premise, but the episode still somehow manages to make us laugh, like when Paulie keeps referring to the Chechnyans the guy killed as Czechoslovakians. I remember being super impressed at how the show managed to balance two different tones so seamlessly. Other shows that try to copy the formula kinda missed out on that. Breaking Bad was just stressful to watch, and there's not much humor to speak of in either Boardwalk Empire or Mad Men. What's more, there's yet another element that played a role in making The Sopranos go down in history. It all has to do with the way the show finished things off. The Sopranos pulled off the impossible with a perfect ending, whether you love it or hate it. One thing's for sure, you simply won't be able to stop talking about that last scene from the series finale. The journey to that scene is pretty alarming too. Major spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it yet. What are you even doing here? Shoot! Anyway, consider yourself warned. Now, that last scene is iconic for a bunch of reasons, and arguably the most divisive thing about it is how it just cuts to black. We never get to find out what happens to Tony. Breaking Bad and Boardwalk Empire both failed in that regard. They gave us definitive conclusions to the storylines.
All clear in no man's land. Eddie?
Roger, you've expressed your desire for another drink. No need to take the orders.
And both Walter White and Nucky Thompson get what's coming to them.
Trying to cheer me up. It's working.
The day you sign a client is the day you start losing him.
No excuses, just coffee.
Yeah.
The Sopranos opted for a way bolder approach, and it's left fans talking about the show non-stop ever since.
Jesus Christ, I can't feel my toes.
You got any blankets?
No, sorry.
So, I think you can tell what I'm getting at here. It's not that other shows aren't great, it's just that The Sopranos did everything first, and it's hard to follow up a show that hit so many highs. What's even harder is trying to surprise audiences that have already seen all of this before. The Sopranos got to take advantage of early HBO, and it never relied on just shock value. Audiences are way harder to surprise now, so no matter how evil an anti-hero on TV becomes, and no matter how dark and twisted their path turns out to be, it will always just seem like something we've already seen on The Sopranos. A lot of shows came close to being good enough for them, but none managed to equal The Sopranos in every single way. The best they could do was equal it in some aspects, but never all of them. That's why The Sopranos' biggest success cannot be repeated. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
I don't got time for this.
Oh, now you're gonna leave your low life? You know what? Here, take your